The northern kingdoms trembled whenever his name was spoken. Lord Azrael, the demon of the Ashen Wastes, had carved his legend through centuries of calculated conquest and merciless dominion. His fortress rose from blackened mountains like a dagger thrust toward the heavens, and the very earth around it had long ago forgotten the touch of sunlight. Those who survived encounters with him spoke of eyes like smoldering embers and a presence that could freeze the blood in your veins. What the terrified peasants and cowering nobles didn't know was that Azrael found the whole performance exhausting. He stood now in his throne room, a vast hall of obsidian pillars and perpetual shadow, listening to his chief advisor drone on about tribute collections from the Eastern Territories. Azrael's actual attention was focused on a small spider spinning an intricate web in the corner of a nearby column. The creature worked with such dedicated precision, utterly unconcerned with demon lords and their tedious administrative duties. "My lord, are you listening?" Azrael shifted his gaze to Malachus, his skeletal advisor whose eye sockets somehow managed to convey disapproval despite being empty. "The Eastern Territories are behind on their tribute. You want to send a battalion to remind them of their obligations. Make it so." Malachus's jaw clattered in what might have been surprise. "You would trust me to handle this without your direct involvement?" "I trust you to be sufficiently menacing." Azrael waved a clawed hand dismissively. "I have other matters requiring my attention." This was a lie. He had no other matters. That was precisely the problem. After Malachus departed, Azrael descended from his throne and walked through the winding corridors of his fortress. Centuries ago, when he'd first claimed this stronghold, every passageway had held purpose and meaning. Now they were simply familiar. He knew every stone, every shadow, every chill draft that whispered through the halls. The demons and lesser creatures that served him cowered appropriately as he passed, which had once been satisfying but now barely registered. He found himself in his private chambers, a surprisingly modest room compared to the imposing grandeur of the rest of the fortress. Here, away from expectations and reputation, he allowed himself to simply be. He removed the ornate armor that added several inches to his already considerable height and sat by the window that overlooked his domain. The Ashen Wastes stretched endlessly, a landscape he had personally drained of color and life to establish his power. It had been strategic, necessary, even. A demon lord could not afford the vulnerability of beauty or the weakness of mercy. And yet, as he looked out at the grey expanse, he felt something uncomfortably close to regret. A sharp pulse of magic snapped his attention back to the present. Someone was attempting a summoning. He felt it like a hook embedded in his essence, tugging insistently. Summoning circles were not uncommon. Foolish mortals regularly attempted to call upon him, usually wanting power or the destruction of their enemies. He typically ignored them, letting his lesser demons handle such trivial matters. This summoning felt different. The magic was refined, almost gentle despite its strength, and it carried a peculiar resonance that intrigued him. Against his better judgment, Azrael decided to answer it personally. He allowed the magic to pull him through the ethereal spaces between worlds, materializing in a flash of crimson light. He prepared his most intimidating stance, ready to terrify whatever desperate fool had called upon him. Instead, he found himself in a moonlit glade that took his breath away. Silver flowers bloomed in impossible profusion, their petals seeming to glow with inner light. A stream ran through the clearing, its waters so pure they reflected the stars above with perfect clarity. The air itself felt alive with gentle magic, so different from the harsh power he wielded that it almost hurt to breathe it in. And in the center of the summoning circle stood the most beautiful being he had ever seen. She was very kind, that much was obvious from the delicate wings that caught the moonlight like stained glass, and the way she seemed to exist in perfect harmony with the natural magic around her. Her hair fell in waves of spun silver, and her eyes were the color of spring leaves. She wore a simple dress of white and green that somehow possessed more elegance than any of the elaborate gowns he'd seen on mortal queens. What struck him most was her expression. She wasn't afraid. "Lord Azrael," she said, and her voice was like birdsong, "thank you for answering my call. My name is Eileen." He stared at her, his prepared threats and intimidating declarations completely forgotten. "You summoned me." "I did. Do you have any idea who I am, what I am?" A small smile touched her lips. The demon lord of the Ashen Wastes, the destroyer of the southern kingdoms, the shadow that walks. You have 17 different titles across 12 languages, most of them focused on your capacity for ruthless violence. And yet you smile. Should I not? She tilted her head, genuinely curious. You came when I called, which suggests you're at least willing to listen. That's all I hoped for. Azrael stepped out of the summoning circle, half expecting some trap to spring. Nothing happened. The glade remained peaceful and Eileen remained calm, watching him with those extraordinary eyes. What do you want from me? Power? Destruction? I warn you, fairy, I don't grant wishes without price. I don't want you to grant anything, Eileen said. I want to offer you something. This was unexpected enough that Azrael's curiosity overcame his suspicion. Offer me what? She took a breath, and for the first time he saw nervousness in her expression. A marriage contract. Silence fell over the glade. Even the stream seemed to quiet, waiting for his response. You want to marry me, Azrael said slowly, certain he had misunderstood. Yes. You, a fairy of obvious refinement and power, want to marry me, a demon lord. Yes. Why? The question came out harsher than he intended, but this had to be some kind of trick or madness. Eileen moved closer, unafraid even as she approached a being that had raised cities. Because I've been watching you, Lord Azrael, for longer than you might think, and I believe I see something that others don't. And what do you imagine you see? Someone who's very, very tired. The words hit him like a physical blow. He turned away, unwilling to let her see whatever expression had crossed his face. You know nothing about me. I know you've been Demon Lord for 300 years. I know you haven't personally led a conquest in nearly 50. I know you spend hours in your chambers staring out at the wasteland you created, and I don't think you're admiring your handiwork. Her voice was gentle, without judgment. I know what it's like to be trapped by others' expectations. Azrael turned back to face her. Even if what you say is true, it doesn't explain this madness. Marriage. My people are pressuring me to choose a consort, Eileen explained. Someone appropriately powerful and politically connected. They have a list of suitable candidates, each more tedious than the last. Fairy nobles who would want to shape me into their ideal of what a fairy lady should be. So you decided to marry a demon lord instead? I decided to choose freedom, she corrected. A marriage between us would be so scandalous, so unexpected, that it would actually grant us both a kind of liberation. Your reputation is already established. You don't need to keep proving how ruthless you are, and I would no longer be available for the political machinations of my court. This is insane. Perhaps, she smiled again, and this time there was a hint of mischief in it, but you haven't said no. She was right, and that troubled him more than anything else. He should have already incinerated her for the presumption, or at least denied her utterly and returned to his fortress. Instead, he found himself actually considering it. What would this marriage entail? He asked carefully. A partnership, Eileen said. Not love, at least not at first, but mutual respect and freedom. We would be bound by contract, but the terms would be ours to decide. You would no longer have to be solely the terrifying demon lord. I would no longer have to be solely the perfect fairy lady. We could simply be ourselves. You don't know what I am when I'm myself. It might be worse than the demon lord. I doubt that very much. She extended her hand toward him. 1 year, give me 1 year as your wife, and if at the end of that time you wish to dissolve the arrangement, I'll agree to it freely. No tricks, no bindings beyond the year. Azrael looked at her outstretched hand, so small and delicate compared to his own clawed grasp. Everything about this was foolish, impulsive, completely contrary to the careful image he'd cultivated for centuries. He took her hand. The moment their skin touched, magic sparked between them, sealing the promise. Eileen's eyes widened slightly, and Azrael felt it too, something unexpected and electric, a connection forming that went beyond simple contract magic. 1 year, he agreed, his voice rough. 1 year, she echoed. And so began the strangest arrangement in either of their long lives. The first challenge came sooner than Azrael had anticipated. He'd assumed they would have at least a few days to formalize their arrangement privately before making any announcements. Eileen, however, had different ideas. "We should tell your court first," she said as they discussed the logistics of their arrangement. Dawn was breaking over the fairy glade, and Azrael found himself oddly reluctant to leave this pocket of peace and return to his fortress. Get the most difficult reaction out of the way immediately. "You believe my demons will be more difficult about this than your fairy nobles." Eileen laughed, a sound like silver bells. "Lord Azrael, my people trade in gossip and subtle social maneuvering. Your people trade in direct violence and intimidation. I know which reaction I'd prefer to face first." She had a point. Still, the thought of bringing her into his fortress, into that place of shadow and ash, made him uncomfortable in a way he didn't fully understand. The Ashen Wastes are not like this glade. They're harsh, lifeless. You might find it difficult to endure. "I'm stronger than I look," Eileen assured him. "Besides, I've already prepared for the environment." She gestured, and a small travel bag appeared beside her. "I've been planning this for months. I'm not going in unprepared." "Months?" Azrael stared at her. "You've been planning to propose marriage to me for months." A faint blush colored her cheeks. "I told you I'd been watching you. I don't make impulsive decisions despite how this might appear. I researched, observed, and planned. This is what I want." There was such conviction in her voice that Azrael found himself believing her, which was dangerous. He'd spent centuries trusting no one, relying only on fear and power to maintain his position. Trust was a luxury demon lords couldn't afford. Yet here he was, about to bring a fairy into his inner sanctum based on nothing more than a night's conversation and a handshake agreement. "Very well," he said, "but stay close to me when we arrive. My people respect strength and fear weakness. Until they understand this arrangement, they may see you as prey." Eileen's expression grew serious. "I understand. I'll follow your lead." The journey back to the fortress was accomplished through shadow walking, a form of travel that mortals found disorienting and unpleasant. Azrael half expected Eileen to struggle with it, but she navigated the darkness with surprising ease, her hand firm in his as they traversed the spaces between light. They emerged in his private chambers, and Azrael immediately noticed Eileen's slight intake of breath, not fear, he realized, but sadness. "It's so empty of life," she said softly, looking around at the bare stone walls and minimal furnishings. "Not just this room, the whole fortress, I can feel it. It's a place of power, not comfort." "The two don't have to be mutually exclusive." She set down her bag and walked to the window, looking out at the Ashen Wastes as he had done countless times. "How long has it been since anything grew here?" 273 years, Azrael said. "I scorched the earth when I claimed this territory. It was strategically necessary to prevent armies from approaching unseen. And now it's simply what is." Eileen turned to face him, and there was something calculating in her expression that reminded him she was not nearly as naive as her gentle demeanor might suggest. "Would you object if I made some changes?" "What kind of changes?" "Small ones," she said. "Nothing that would compromise your security or reputation, but perhaps a few touches that would make this place feel less like a tomb." He should have said no. The fortress was perfect as it was, a physical manifestation of his power and the fear he inspired. Allowing a fairy to soften its edges would send the wrong message. "Do what you wish with these chambers," he heard himself say instead. "But the rest of the fortress remains as it is, at least until my people have accepted your presence." Her smile was radiant. "Thank you." Before their conversation could continue, a sharp knock sounded at the door. Malachus's voice filtered through. "My lord, there's been a development. The Eastern Territories sent an unexpected response to our demands." Azrael glanced at Eileen, who nodded understanding. Time to face his court. "Enter," he commanded. Malachus pushed open the door, already talking as he stepped inside. "They've agreed to double their tribute if we—" The skeletal demon stopped mid-sentence, his empty eye sockets somehow fixating on Eileen. "What is that doing here?" Her name is Eileen, Azrael said coolly, and you will address her with respect. Malicious's bones rattled, a sign of his agitation. My lord, have you taken a prisoner? If this is a fairy noble, her people will. I am not his prisoner, Eileen interrupted gently but firmly. I'm his wife. The silence that followed was absolute. Azrael could hear the distant drip of water somewhere in the fortress, the whisper of wind through stone corridors, the creak of Malicious's jaw working soundlessly. You're what? The demon finally managed. My wife, Azrael confirmed. We were married last night. Inform the court. I want everyone assembled in the throne room within the hour. Malachus looked between them, clearly struggling to process this information. My lord, surely this is some kind of joke or trick. You cannot simply marry a fairy, the implications alone are mine to handle, Azrael finished. 1 hour, Malachus, don't make me repeat myself. The skeletal demon bowed, his movements jerky with suppressed emotion, and retreated from the room. They could hear him muttering to himself as he stalked down the corridor, words like madness and catastrophe echoing back to them. Eileen looked amused. That went well. That was the easy part, Azrael warned. The full court will be worse. He was correct. When they entered the throne room an hour later, the assembled demons, wraiths, and dark creatures fell into shocked silence. Azrael had donned his full ceremonial armor, appearing every inch the ruthless demon lord his reputation promised. Eileen walked beside him in her simple dress, looking impossibly delicate and luminous in the shadowy hall. The contrast was so stark that several lesser demons actually hissed in confusion. Azrael took his throne, and instead of standing below as a supplicant or prisoner would, Eileen stood beside him, another breach of protocol that sent murmurs rippling through the assembled court. Silence, Azrael commanded, and silence fell instantly. I have summoned you to announce a significant change. I have taken a wife. Eileen of the fairy courts will be afforded all respect and protection due to my consort. Anyone who fails to honor this will answer to me personally. The murmurs erupted into actual voices, dozens of demons speaking over each other. Azrael let it continue for exactly 10 seconds before releasing a pulse of raw power that rattled the pillars and extinguished half the torches in the room. Silence returned, now tinged with fear. I did not ask for your opinions, Azrael said coldly. I have made my decision. You will accept it or you will leave my service. Those are your only options. A massive demon with horns like a bull stepped forward. Karath, one of his military commanders. My lord, we mean no disrespect, but this is unprecedented. How can we be certain this fairy hasn't enchanted you? Their kind are known for glamours and tricks. Before Azrael could respond, Eileen spoke. A reasonable concern, Commander Karath. She used his name without having been introduced, which earned her a few surprised glances. If I had enchanted your lord, would I allow him to set the terms of our contract as 1 year, freely dissolvable at his discretion? You know my name, Karath said suspiciously. I know all your names, Eileen replied calmly. Karath, commander of the Northern Legion, veteran of the Siege of Broken Spire. Malachus, chief advisor, keeper of the treasury and historical records. Silthais, mistress of shadows, head of intelligence networks. She continued, naming demon after demon with their titles and accomplishments, information that should have been impossible for an outsider to possess. The throne room had gone very quiet again, but now the quality of the silence was different, calculating rather than merely shocked. You've been spying on us, Silthais hissed, the shadow demon's form rippling with anger. I've been researching, Eileen corrected. There's a difference. If I intended harm, I would hardly announce my knowledge so openly. I wanted to understand the household I was joining. She turned to address the full court. I know this is unexpected and strange. Your lord is known throughout the realms as ruthless and solitary. My people will be equally shocked by this union. But I give you my word as a daughter of the fairy courts that I mean no harm to Lord Azrael or to any of you. Words mean nothing, Karath growled. Especially fairy words, all twisted up with half-truths and pretty lies. Azrael stirred, ready to put the commander in his place, but Eileen touched his arm gently. May I? He was curious to see how she would handle this, so he nodded. Eileen stepped down from the dais, approaching Karath directly. The massive demon towered over her, but she showed no fear. "You're right not to trust me yet. Trust is earned, not demanded. So I propose a test. You are a warrior, so you understand oaths sworn in blood and battle. I will submit to a binding of your choice, one that will prove I intend no betrayal of this court." Karath's eyes narrowed. "Any binding I choose?" "Within reason," Eileen said. "I won't accept anything that would allow you to simply kill me or command me absolutely, but a truth binding or a prohibition against bringing harm to the demon court, those I would accept." Malachus rattled forward. "My lord, this could be a trick." "It could be," Azrael agreed, "but I'm curious to see where it leads. Karath, what binding would satisfy you of her intentions?" The bull demon thought for a long moment. "A truth binding with 3 questions and a prohibition against deliberate harm to you, my lord, for the duration of your marriage contract." Eileen nodded. "Acceptable. Malachus, you keep the records. You must know the appropriate ritual." The skeletal demon looked to Azrael, who nodded permission. With obvious reluctance, Malachus began gathering the necessary components for the binding ritual. Within minutes, a circle had been prepared, and Eileen stood within it, calm and composed. The binding took hold with a flash of silver and red light intertwining. Eileen swayed slightly but remained standing. "First question," Karath rumbled. "Did you enchant Lord Azrael to agree to this marriage?" "No," Eileen said, and the binding magic pulsed with confirmation of truth. "Second question, do you serve any power that wishes harm upon this court or our lord?" "No." Again, the magic confirmed truth. Third question, Karath paused, and something almost like cunning crossed his brutal features. "Do you have feelings for Lord Azrael beyond political convenience?" Eileen's eyes widened slightly and a blush crept across her cheeks. The binding compelled truth, and after a moment's hesitation she answered, "Yes." The throne room erupted into surprised chatter. Azrael found himself sitting very still, that single word echoing in his mind. Karath stepped back, looking satisfied. "The binding holds. She cannot lie while within its influence, and she cannot deliberately harm our lord without the binding destroying her. I am satisfied she is not an immediate threat." Other demons came forward with questions, testing the binding and Eileen's truthfulness. She answered each one clearly, and the binding never once flickered to indicate falsehood. Gradually, the hostility in the room shifted to wary acceptance. Finally, when the questions had exhausted themselves, Eileen was released from the circle. She swayed, and before Azrael quite realized what he was doing, he was there, steadying her with a hand on her arm. "Such bindings take a toll," he said quietly. "I'm all right," she assured him, though she did lean slightly on his support. "It was necessary." He guided her back to the dais, and this time when she took her place beside his throne, no one objected. Over the following weeks, Azrael discovered that living with Eileen was nothing like he'd imagined. She didn't cower or flinch from the darkness of his fortress. Instead, she moved through it like a breath of fresh air, bringing small changes that somehow never felt like intrusions. She placed crystals that caught and reflected light in the corridors, making the shadows less oppressive. She convinced the kitchen staff, a group of surly demons who had been serving the same unimaginative meals for decades, to try new recipes. She even managed to coax a few hardy plants to grow in pots near the windows, though how they survived in the ash-tainted air was beyond Azrael's understanding. "It's all about finding what wants to live," she explained one evening as they shared dinner in his chambers. She transformed the stark room into something almost comfortable, with soft furnishings that didn't compromise the room's dignity and warm lights that pushed back the gloom. "Even in harsh environments, some things are resilient enough to thrive. You just have to give them a chance." Azrael suspected she wasn't just talking about plants. The demon court had gradually accepted her presence, though more out of respect for Azrael's authority than any warmth toward Eileen herself. She didn't seem bothered by their coldness. Instead, she went about learning their names, their roles, their preferences. She spent time in the library with Malachus discussing the fortress's history. She observed Karath's training sessions with genuine interest. She even managed to have civil conversations with Silthais, which Azrael would have thought impossible. "You're winning them over," he observed one night. Eileen looked up from the book she'd been reading. I'm not trying to win anyone over, I'm just being myself and letting them get used to having me around. Fear fades with familiarity. Is that what you're doing with me as well, waiting for familiarity to replace fear? You're not afraid of me, Eileen said with certainty. You're afraid of what I represent. And what's that? Change, vulnerability, the possibility that you might want something beyond power and isolation. She was far too perceptive. Azrael stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Ashen Wastes. I've been what I am for 3 centuries. Change isn't simple. No, Eileen agreed, coming to stand beside him, but that doesn't make it impossible. They stood in comfortable silence, and Azrael realized this had become familiar, these quiet evenings, her presence beside him, the sense that he didn't have to be the demon lord every moment of every day. It was dangerously appealing. The first real test of their arrangement came from an unexpected direction. A formal delegation from the fairy courts arrived at the fortress gates, demanding an audience. They've come to retrieve you, Azrael said as they prepared to receive the delegation. Eileen was adjusting the drape of her dress, her expression calm. They've come to try. Whether they succeed is another matter entirely. The delegation was led by a stern-faced fairy noble named Lord Talmaris, whose silver robes and elaborate crown marked him as someone of significant rank. He entered the throne room with 6 guards and an air of righteous authority. Lady Eileen, he said, barely glancing at Azrael, your family is deeply concerned. This madness must end. Come home and we will speak no more of this unfortunate incident. It's not an incident, Eileen replied coolly. It's a marriage, properly contracted and binding. A contract made under duress, surely. Everyone knows the demon lord's reputation. What choice did you have but to agree to his demands? Azrael felt his temper stirring, but before he could speak, Eileen laughed. Actually laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that echoed through the throne room. Lord Talmaris, I summoned him, I proposed the marriage. Lord Azrael is many things, but he didn't coerce me into anything. Talmaris's expression shifted to dismay. You summoned a demon lord. Eileen, what were you thinking? Your family will be scandalized, your position in court. My position in court is precisely why I made this choice, Eileen interrupted. I was tired of being a piece on your game board, moved around to suit everyone's political ambitions but my own. This marriage gives me freedom. Freedom? Talmaris looked around the shadowy throne room with obvious distaste. You call this freedom, living in this dark place with these creatures? Yes, Eileen said simply, because it's my choice. That's what you never understood, any of you. I don't want to be protected and positioned and polished like a trophy. I want to live on my own terms. The fairy courts will not accept this. Then the fairy courts will have to learn to be disappointed, Eileen said. I'm not coming back, not now and not when my year is complete. Make that very clear to my family. Talmaris turned to Azrael, his expression hardening. And you, Demon Lord, what do you gain from this arrangement? What hold do you have over her? Azrael considered the question. A month ago he would have given a threatening answer designed to intimidate and end the conversation. Now, with Eileen standing beside his throne, he found himself answering honestly. I gain a companion who sees me as something other than a source of fear, he said. And I have no hold over her except the terms of a contract she proposed and we both agreed to. Your issue is not with me, Lord Talmaris. It's with the fact that she made a choice you didn't approve. The fairy noble's wings flared in agitation. This is not over, the courts will not. The courts will do nothing, Eileen said firmly, because I am of age and of sound mind and I have made a binding contract with another sovereign power. Unless they wish to declare war on the demon lord of the Ashen Wastes over a personal marriage choice, they will accept the situation. Talmaris stared at her, clearly recognizing the steel beneath her gentle demeanor. You've changed. No, Eileen said, I've just stopped hiding who I actually am. Now, unless you have official business with Lord Azrael beyond attempting to retrieve me, I suggest you return to the courts with my message. The delegation left shortly after, Talmaris's displeasure evident in every rigid line of his posture. When they were gone, Azrael turned to Eileen. "You burned that bridge quite thoroughly." "It was already burned the moment I summoned you," Eileen said. "I just made it official." She looked up at him, and there was vulnerability in her expression now that the delegation was gone. "Do you think I made a mistake?" "I think you made a choice," Azrael said carefully. "Whether it's a mistake depends on what you hope to gain." "I hope to find someone who wouldn't try to change me into what they thought I should be," Eileen said. "Someone who understood what it meant to wear a mask for so long you almost forget your real face." "And have you found that?" She smiled. "I think so, have you?" Azrael realized they'd moved closer during the conversation, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. "Yes," he said quietly, "though it terrifies me." "Good," Eileen said. "It terrifies me too. That's how I know it's real." He wasn't sure which of them closed the remaining distance, but suddenly they were kissing, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world despite how impossible the pairing seemed. When they finally pulled apart, Eileen was breathless and smiling, and Azrael felt something in his chest that he hadn't experienced in centuries: hope. "So much for a purely political arrangement," she said. "You confessed to having feelings during the binding ritual," Azrael reminded her. "I think we left purely political behind some time ago." "True," she took his hand, her small fingers intertwining with his clawed ones. "What do we do now?" "I have no idea," Azrael admitted. "I've conquered kingdoms and commanded armies, but I have no experience with this." "Then we'll figure it out together." Eileen leaned against him and he wrapped an arm around her, marveling at how right it felt. "We have time." They did have time. Nearly 11 months remained on their contract, and suddenly that seemed both too long and not nearly long enough. The changes in the fortress accelerated after that. With Azrael's explicit permission, Eileen began working on returning life to small portions of the Ashen Wastes. It was slow, delicate work coaxing life from scorched earth, but gradually a garden began to take shape outside the fortress walls, a green space that seemed to glow against the grey landscape. The demons of the court watched with varying degrees of suspicion and curiosity. Some saw it as weakness, a softening of their lord's fearsome reputation. Others recognized it for what it was, a sign that their lord was finding balance, becoming something more complete than just the embodiment of ruthless power. Azrael found himself spending more time in the garden watching Eileen work. She would talk to the plants as she tended them, encouraging them to grow, and he discovered that he enjoyed listening to her voice. She spoke to him the same way sometimes, gentle words that encouraged him to open up, to share the thoughts and feelings he'd kept buried for centuries. "Tell me about before," she said one afternoon as they walked through the growing garden. "Before you became the Demon Lord, what were you?" "I don't remember being anything else," Azrael said. "It's been too long." "Try," Eileen encouraged. "There must be something." He thought back past decades and centuries to a time that felt more like a dream than memory. "I was a scholar," he said finally, surprising himself. "I studied magic and history. I wanted to understand how power worked, how it could be used to create order from chaos." "What changed?" "I realized that in a world of violence and conquest, scholars were crushed underfoot, so I became something that couldn't be crushed. I became the thing others feared." Eileen was quiet for a moment. "Do you think that scholar is still in there somewhere?" "I don't know," Azrael admitted. "He's been buried for a very long time." "Maybe you could let him out occasionally," Eileen suggested. "Not to replace the Demon Lord, but to stand alongside him. People aren't just one thing, Azrael. We're all complicated, contradictory, constantly changing. You're allowed to be more than your reputation." The idea was simultaneously liberating and terrifying. That night, Azrael did something he hadn't done in over a century. He went to the fortress library and pulled out books on magic theory, on history, on philosophy. He read until dawn, and it felt like coming home to a part of himself he'd thought was lost forever. Eileen found him there in the morning, surrounded by books, and she smiled like he'd given her a gift. "The scholar emerges," she said. Don't get used to it, Azrael said, but there was no bite to the words. Too late, Eileen replied, kissing his cheek. I'm already used to all of you. The 11 months passed more quickly than Azrael could have imagined. The garden flourished, spreading slowly but steadily across the Ashen Wastes. The fortress itself had transformed, subtle changes that made it feel less like a tomb and more like a home. The demon court had fully accepted Eileen's presence, some even growing fond of her in their own way. And Azrael had changed most of all. He still ruled with strength and strategy, but the ruthlessness that had defined him for centuries had softened into something more nuanced. He found diplomatic solutions where before he would have resorted to force. He listened to his advisors' counsel rather than simply issuing commands. He laughed, something his court had never heard before Eileen's arrival. "You've made me weak," he said one evening, though his tone held no accusation. "I've made you human," Eileen corrected gently. "Well, as human as a demon lord can be. You were never weak, Azrael, you were isolated, there's a difference." They were in the garden, watching the sunset paint colors across a sky that had been grey for centuries. Eileen had somehow coaxed the very air to clear, allowing light and color to return to his domain. "The year is almost complete," Azrael said. "We should discuss the contract." He felt Eileen tense slightly beside him. "Yes, we should. When we made this arrangement, you said 1 year, freely dissolvable if I wished. That deadline is 3 days away." "I remember." Azrael turned to face her fully. "I need to know something. That confession during the binding ritual when you admitted to having feelings for me, was that a passing fascination or something deeper?" Eileen met his gaze steadily. "Something much deeper. I've been in love with you for months, Azrael, probably since those first few weeks when I saw you reading in the library, completely absorbed in ideas and knowledge, looking nothing like the terrifying demon lord everyone fears. I love both sides of you, the strength that commands respect and the gentleness you show when you think no one's watching." Her honesty took his breath away. "I don't know how to be loved," he admitted. "I've spent centuries being feared." "You've been doing fine so far," Eileen said with a slight smile. "Love isn't something you perfect, Azrael. It's something you practice every day with all your imperfections showing." "I love you," he said, the words feeling strange but right. "I didn't think I was capable of it anymore, but you proved me wrong. You've proven me wrong about many things." Eileen's eyes shimmered with tears. "So what do we do when the contract ends?" Azrael reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a ring, crafted from a combination of shadow metal from his forges and living wood from Eileen's garden, impossible materials woven together into something new. "We make a new contract," he said, "not for 1 year but for as long as we both shall live, not because of politics or convenience but because I cannot imagine my existence without you in it." Eileen laughed through her tears. "Is the fearsome demon lord proposing to me?" "The fearsome demon lord and the long-forgotten scholar are both proposing," Azrael said, "as is every part of me in between. Marry me again, Eileen. Marry me properly with full knowledge of what we are to each other." "Yes," she said immediately. "Yes, to all of you forever." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and magic sparked between them, a binding far stronger and more beautiful than the contract that had brought them together. This was a choice made not from desperation or strategy, but from love. The wedding, when it took place 2 weeks later, was an event that shocked both their worlds. Demons and fairies gathered in the garden that had grown from the Ashen Wastes, standing together in wary peace to witness the impossible union. Lord Talmaris attended, though his expression suggested he'd eaten something sour. To Azrael's surprise, Eileen's family also came, including her mother, who was a high-ranking noble in the fairy courts. She approached Azrael before the ceremony with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "So you're the demon who stole my daughter's heart," she said. "She stole mine first," Azrael replied. "I was merely returning the favor." Eileen's mother studied him with eyes the same color as her daughter's. "She seems happy, truly happy, in a way I never saw when she lived in our courts. I don't pretend to understand this match, but I can recognize genuine feeling when I see it." "I will protect her with everything I am," Azrael promised. See that you do, she said, because if you break her heart, demon lord or not, you will answer to her mother. The threat was delivered with a smile, but Azrael recognized the steel beneath it. Eileen came by her strength honestly. The ceremony itself was a blend of traditions, fairy rites woven together with demon customs in a way that should have been chaotic, but instead felt perfectly balanced. When they exchanged vows, Azrael spoke words he'd never imagined saying, promises of partnership and love and growth. I vow to be worthy of your faith in me, he said, to embrace change rather than fear it, and to build with you a life that honors both our natures. Eileen's vows were equally heartfelt. I vow to see all of you in darkness and in light, and to love every contradiction and complexity. Together we are neither demon nor fairy, but something new and wonderful. When they kissed to seal their vows, something extraordinary happened. Magic exploded from the point where they touched, washing over the entire gathering in waves of silver and crimson light. Where it passed, the Ashen Wastes bloomed, life returning in a rush that spread for miles. The guests gasped as they watched transformation ripple across the landscape, grey giving way to green, death yielding to rebirth. When the magic finally settled, the fortress stood not in a wasteland but in a valley of growing things, a place where shadow and light existed in balance. Did you do that? Azrael asked Eileen, awed by the magnitude of the change. We did that, she corrected. Your power and mine working together. This is what happens when opposites stop fighting and start creating together. The celebration that followed was unlike anything either court had experienced. Demons and fairies shared food and drink, initial wariness giving way to cautious curiosity and eventually genuine conversation. Karath ended up deep in discussion with one of Eileen's fairy guards about combat techniques. Malachus found common ground with a fairy scholar over historical records. Even Silthais managed civil interaction with fairy courtiers, though she remained characteristically aloof. As Azrael watched his two worlds beginning to blend, he felt Eileen's hand slip into his. No regrets, she asked. None, he said truthfully, though I still cannot quite believe this is my life now. Believe it, Eileen said. You're stuck with me, Lord Azrael, for better or worse in shadow and light until the end of our very long lives. I can think of worse fates, he said, pulling her close. In fact, I can think of no better one. Later, when the guests had departed and they stood together in their transformed domain, Azrael reflected on the journey that had brought them here. A year ago, he had been the feared demon lord, isolated in his power, going through the motions of ruling without truly living. Now he was still a demon lord, still powerful and respected, but he was also a husband, a partner, a person allowed to be complex and contradictory. What are you thinking about? Eileen asked, noticing his contemplative expression. About change, Azrael said, about how I spent centuries convinced that I had to be one thing, ruthless, isolated, unchanging, and then you appeared and proved that I could be all of that and something more, something better. You were always capable of being more, Eileen said. You just needed permission to show it, or maybe you needed someone who would see it even when you were trying to hide it. What do we do now? Azrael asked. We've shocked both our worlds, transformed the Ashen Wastes into something living, proven that demons and fairies can coexist peacefully. What comes next? Eileen smiled, her expression full of mischief and love and infinite possibility. Now we live, Azrael, we rule your domain together, we tend our garden, we build bridges between our peoples, we have arguments and reconciliations, we discover new things about each other every day, we face whatever challenges come together. That's not much of a plan. It's the best kind of plan, Eileen countered. It's flexible, open to possibility, and centered on the only thing that really matters. Which is us, you and me, choosing each other every day, not because a contract says we must, but because we want to. Azrael kissed her then, under stars that shone brighter over his domain than they had in centuries, surrounded by life that had returned to a place of death, holding the person who had transformed not just his world but his very self. The demon lord everyone feared had found something more powerful than terror, more lasting than conquest. He had found love, partnership, and the courage to be fully himself. And in a garden that grew from ashes, where shadow and light danced together in perfect balance, they began the greatest adventure of all, a shared life full of infinite tomorrows.